Let's be honest about the air. The first thing that hits you when the cabin door opens and the pressure lets go isn't the crisp, clean purity of a travel brochure. No. It is a heavy, metallic cocktail. You are breathing in a very specific, industrial perfume. It's a mix of aviation fuel burning off the engines of 100 transatlantic jets and the briny organic decay of the North Atlantic fisheries, and, most aggressively, the geothermal sulfur stack. It is the rotten egg punch of hydrogen sulfide, and when the wind turns, the sharp, burnt match throat hit of sulfur dioxide. That smell? That is the scent of the Earth's interior exhaling. It is the smell of power, danger, and energy. Welcome to Reykjanesbær. Then there's the lie printed on your boarding pass. Your ticket says you are landing in Reykjavik. You are not. You are landing in Keflavik, on the blistered, wind-scoured head of the peninsula, a full 45-minute drive from the capital. You step off the plane here, and the Atlantic doesn't ask for permission. It hits you. Horizontal rain and gale-force winds are not a weather event. They are the default setting. If the wind slaps you in the face the moment you arrive, don't take it personally. It is the price of entry. If you want to understand why anyone would settle in this wind tunnel, you have to dig. South, in the village of Hafnir, archaeology has thrown a grenade into the history books. We used to think Iceland was settled in 874. But here, buried under the black sand, they found a cabin that evidence suggests dates back a century earlier. And they weren't just farming. They were likely hunting walrus. They were here for the ivory, the white gold of the Dark Ages. Imagine that sensory reality. Huddling in a turf outpost, butchering massive animals on the freezing beach, completely isolated at the edge of the known world. That need to scavenge never left. Nearby stands the black stone church of Kovalsneskirkja. Inside, the wind stops howling against the porous basalt, and you are enveloped in the smell of smooth, aged wood. But run your hand along the pew. This isn't local timber. Iceland has almost no usable forests. This wood was a tragedy before it was a church. It is the skeleton of the Jamestown, a massive American ship that wrecked here in 1881. Accounts say it was unmanned, a ghost ship full of prime timber. For the locals, the disaster wasn't a loss. It was a divine delivery service. They stripped the wreck to build a sanctuary. Here, destruction becomes shelter. This tension between glory and mud is everywhere. In Njarðvík, at the Viking World Museum, you can smell the ambition. It smells of tar and pine. Suspended in the air is the Íslendingur, a faithful replica of the famous Gokstad ship. This isn't a prop. It's a seaworthy beast that actually sailed to New York in the year 2000. Beneath that keel, looking at the open deck with zero shelter, you realize the audacity it took to cross the North Atlantic. No cabin, no heating, just wool, timber, and a death wish. But a few hundred meters down the road at Stekkjarkot, the glory evaporates. This is a traditional turf house, inhabited until the 1920s. Inside, it is low, cramped, and smells of damp earth and peat smoke. The walls are made of lava rocks packed with mud. While the Viking ship is about expansion, this hut is about compression. It's about families huddled together, eyes stinging from the smoke, while the wind tried to tear the roof off. That is the real history of this place. Not just the sailing, but the enduring. That endurance evolved into industry. Njarðvík is a working engine. At the shipyard, the air changes again. Sharp ozone from welding torches and the metallic tang of grinding steel. This is where they haul massive trawlers out of the water. You see the blue sparks of the welders cascading down the rusted hulls against the gray sky. Romance dies quickly here. It's replaced by noise and the smell of anti-fouling paint. And here is the part people miss. You don't leave it behind. The air follows you. Ozone in your throat, paint in your hair, salt on your lips. Reykjanes doesn't do souvenirs. It does residue. But those sparks ignited something else. The proximity to the American NATO base turned Keflavik into a cultural pressure cooker. For decades, a chain-link fence separated the town from the Americans. But radio waves don't respect fences. The kids here heard rock and roll before the rest of the island. They imported the noise. But recently, the export shifted. When productions like True Detective needed a stand-in for the eternal polar night, they found it here. Under the lonely orange streetlights of Ausbru and the desolate roads of the harbor. They captured that raw, cinematic gloom that you don't need a studio to build, because it just exists here. Even when the story changes, the air doesn't. It keeps the receipts: fuel, fish, sulfur, and now that faint metallic aftertaste of industry. You can drive 10 minutes, switch scenes completely, and your lungs still know exactly where you are. Over in the harbor of Keflavik, at the Dúshús, they try to preserve the memory of the light. Inside this old Danish trading post, the smell of salt spray mixes with coffee. They display handcrafted models of the fishing fleet, delicate wooden tributes to the iron beasts you saw at the shipyard. And right next door, they embrace the folklore. The giantess in the mountain sleeps in her cave, a massive, breathing animatronic that smells of damp earth and connects the digital generation to the ancient stories of trolls who turned to stone in the sun. But the locals don't just look at models or trolls. They survive the cold with heat. At the pool in Keflavik, you strip down, run through the freezing air, and sink into the hot tubs. This is the liquid parliament. In the steamy, sulfur-scented air of the pot, locals dissect politics, gossip, and the weather. It is a communal warmth that defies the cold Atlantic wind. So, most arrivals face a split. They either grab a rental car and sprint straight to the capital to escape the wind, or they turn south into the steam. If ambition takes over, the road leads toward the tip of the peninsula. The roadside turns into space. Scattered along the route are the Pláneturnar, the planets. You pass Jupiter in the moss. You pass Saturn. But the gravitational center is deep in the steam. The pavement funnels you straight into the Reykjanes power plant. The sun is waiting there, a massive sphere set against screaming vents and geothermal pipes, a nuclear furnace matched by a geothermal one. As you pull away, passing tiny planets in the lava fields, you feel exactly how lonely the outer reaches really are. A breath is unavoidable here. You end up inhaling that heavy, metallic cocktail one last time. Remember that smell? the aviation fuel, the fish, the sulfur. It's not just pollution. It is the scent of the Jamestown timber, the tar of the Viking ship, the sparks of the shipyard, and the steam of the power plant. It is the smell of a community that lives on the edge of the world and refuses to fall off. If you want the collected notes on these layers, from the shipwrecks to the hot pots, they are listed at icelandexplained.com. The weather isn't a forecast here. It is the operating condition. And remember, the road is a thin agreement. The wind loves breaking agreements.